Hello. So if we're here together right now, it's because you've already seen one of my videos, or you've listened to one of my podcasts, or you've read something about the program. And what we want to do right now is to talk about what's actually in that program. Thrive, how to do better than survive in self-isolation. So what's in that program? Well, first of all, in the introduction, we're talking about the way in which some situations put us in corner where the safest things to do is to retreat from crowds. So if we're talking about self-isolation or quarantine or something which has been imposed upon us, then we have to be very different from what we are normally. And we're looking at exactly what this means. It's not just the story of a virus which makes us retreat from crowds, but there is also, hysteria situations like national elections or some topic that's really gets everybody heated up. What's often the case is that when you're starting to react without much thinking, then you are not very lucid. And we're looking at what kind of situations are presenting these issues that makes us want to take a step back and start thinking about what's going on in a more calm, quiet, and collected manner. The problem when this happens is that our societies are ill-equipped to enjoy peace, the quiet, and in particular our own company. So we tend to be kind of fretting around if we're left with ourselves. Really, what current society is doing is making us rush out of our own skills. It's really a crazy way of life, but we seem to need to fill the time. We don't have enough time, but when we do, we try to fill it up. The same thing happens, we rush out of our head and then we lose a connection between ourselves and our life. So we tend to rush around and try to fill the time. We say we have no time, but yes, the little time that we have, we try to fill it in with all kinds of stuff, most of which is totally unnecessary. At the end of the day, we are putting an enormous distance between ourselves and our lives because we don't know what's happening. We just don't have any focus left. Does it sound bad? Well, current events are bringing those uncomfortable truths home. There is no need actually to go in respiratory failure when you look for a way to thrive into self-isolation. But whether it is, once again, imposed through sanitary conditions or whether it is because you've suddenly realized that somewhere along the line you are drifting away and your life is disappearing down the tube and you have no idea where it's gone, then you have to sit and take this famous step back. And this is what we're going to be looking at during that program. Of course, this obvious virus hysteria could be the longed-for turning point for many of us, because for once, it seems that it is global. It's not like you can rush to another part of the world and have a party. Even some of our youngsters don't seem to have gotten it yet, but the possibility to run away somewhere are disappearing. So does it mean that instead of complain and say, oh, it's terrible, I'm not going to survive this, and so on and so forth, it could really be turning into that little push that's making us think about things much more deeply and reconcile our common sense and joie de vivre with our daily encounters with life. So that's what we're going to be talking about. Even more so, self-isolation, it can really bring us the peace, the solace that we really, really need to revisit. And then we go one step further into not just rushing around, not just kind of trying to stop and see where our life is going, but we also can go one step further and think about what really is our life's meanings. There is something that I have been talking about, which I call our happiness parameters. And this is a part of a whole section of this program. But very rapidly, we'll be talking about what is a happiness parameter, what makes you happy. Many people think that it's a state that you're in terms of happiness, but what we'll see is actually those are not states, they are dynamic situations. And when we keep our balance in those dynamic situations, then we attain a kind of happiness that is not being disturbed every time, somebody is blowing in the wind. And that's what we call happiness parameters. And I'm sure you're going to be very excited when you get to that part, because it will help you resolve a lot of questions that you have in terms of what really makes me happy. Is it this or is it that? And you'll find that the answer is going to be incredibly simpler and different from what you've thought. So anyways, that's going to be one of those things. So in the first section, we are looking at really something, we're looking in the mirror at ourselves. What is self-isolation and why is it such a frightening thought? I mean, there is a fact versus fictions. What does it mean? How do you put it in place? What happens during that period? And perhaps we're going to be, because this program was actually planned well before this virus story, and it will, kind of be useful much time afterwards. But we're going to be looking more in particular, if you are really forced to go into isolation, what does it mean and what happens during that period? What you can and cannot do, because this will really depend on where you are, what's happening, and what are the decisions that so-called governments are taking that is restricting our liberty to move around. Self-isolation, apart from being a little bit of a pain in the back if it is imposed from the outside, and difficult to establish in any case, even if you are deciding to go into self-isolation yourself, not at a moment of global crisis, but perhaps more at a moment where you need to reflect about life. It's not always easy to put into place. And how do I know that? Well, because I've done retreat for many years, and getting into a retreat is not always a simple thing to do. It's once we have made this decision, it's also useful to keep the motivation to fact-check one's own life and to start thinking, looking back once again. It's always a matter of stepping back when you get into isolation. What do we actually do every day on a normal basis? What are our goals? And in the light of what could be for some life and death situation, how relevant are they? If the goals that we have is just on a purely material basis because we're getting caught up in life, life happens, as they say. Well, life doesn't happen. You happen to be, in charge of your life, even though sometimes we feel that we aren't. So why have we got this disconnection? Why have we got this discrepancy? Is it really correct, or are we getting to the stage where actually we have put ideas into our head and we have forgotten that we are at the steering wheel and we have the accelerator and the brakes at our disposal? This is a good time to do this fact-checking, and this is part of what we're going to be looking at in the third section of the third paragraph into the first section. These goals that we think are so important, or that we may even, kind of have forgotten, but when we first start looking, we are finding goals which aren't really goals. They are just, as I was mentioning, things which have happened to happen, and we took them as goals. Get the next best job, get married, have kids, secure a house, and go out and go on holidays, and get the kids to school and to college, and so on and so forth. And before you blink 3 times, you are already retiring, and there's nothing very much to say about what happened to your dreams. What happened when you first started, when you thought you were going to do, change the world, do something exciting, become a doctor, and maybe you've become a doctor, but the way you're a doctor is not what you've dreamt about, because you're in a system and you are caught up in the system, and this has nothing to do anymore with healing. It's become a big business. Maybe I'm taking the example of doctors because this is what happened to me. I was supposed to become such a person. I thought, no, the way things are going, it's not going to be what I want. So I get this. It's not just doctors. It happens in all kinds of things that we do in life. How much do we give those dreams up when we start rushing? We are rushing to, just to rush, really. It becomes a self-defeating, it becomes a complete self-categorizing activity We rush because we need to rush, and because everybody else rushes, and because in the rush we just discover that there is something else that we could be doing, and so we are taken up by life. Let's get back to actually what was it, what is it, or because dreams at 15 can be the same at 45 or 50, but sometimes they have evolved, they have been refined, you found different ways dreaming about things that you'd like to do and you haven't because XYZ. We're going to be looking at what were your dreams and how did you come to actually giving them up. And then in the next section, there is a correlation which is in terms of relationships. It's a relationships, of course, with all the people around you, your family, your significant others, your children, your parents, etc. But most importantly, the first relationship is with oneself and with one's internal meaning. And this internal meaning should be dictating your external activities. When your internal meaning is not in sync with your external activities, then, we experience a disconnect and things go pear-shaped, and we definitely are not within our happiness parameters. So we're going to be looking at this in the 5th modules. In the 6 modules, there is something that comes over and over again when I run retreats. In this particular case, it's not going to be any different if you're forced to go into self-isolation or whether you choose to. There is always a time when everything stops and it's frightening. Suddenly there's a big silence. But in that silence, it doesn't last. All kinds of thoughts are rushing into your head and you think that you're going to go mad, and this is you standing in front of the mirror and saying, oh my God, how am I going to tame all this? So there is always this fear to find ourselves face to face with ourselves. And that's what we're going to be talking about, recognizing and learn to deal with. And then because we are actually, as they say, social animals, which is maybe the case or maybe not, but there is certainly the power of the tribe. Within that tribe, there is always a fear of being lonely. There is a fear of missing out. There is a fear of death. There is a fear of illness. There is a fear of something can go wrong and you don't know what it is. So you need to feel close to something in order to reassure yourself, because you haven't developed the spine, your own backbone, to realize that all of those are just concepts that have taken over your own thinking pattern and your own ability to analyze and to control your life. And this happens very much in our societies because everything is done to disempower us from thinking. And then that's the last bit, fear to have time to think. Because there's a difference between controlling what it is or what you want to be thinking about. You want to be reflecting upon some deeper meaning. You want to be reflecting upon some turning points in your life, which is not just a financial situation, but really, should I do this or should I do that? What I really want? How do I see myself? What does it mean? I mean, you're confronting yourself with big stories like the one we are currently living, but we're also currently living disintegration of our environment, the collapse of all ecosystems, and that was not really so much touching us, although lots of people are making noises about it. But it is not touching us as much as perhaps the fact that you're being locked down, and that's it. Then you have to think, what on earth are you going to be thinking about? Why are you afraid to be left with your own thoughts as if they were going to take over from you? And we're going to be looking at this and, of course, taking away the sting out of it. When you get into the situation, whether wanted or not, once again, of wanting to, having to get into isolation, how are you actually taking care of preparing that time? There is a time where you need to do general tasks to be prepared in and around the home. There is a time when you need to care for family and friends. What arrangements are you going to make? How are you going to keep contact or not? What's going to be important? Who are you staying in touch with? Who do you want to be in your very close circle? And so on and so forth. Then there is some really material things like what you take as food and water, how you prepare things so that you don't have to run around. The same goes for medicine, the same goes for household items. If you've got pets, how you're going to care for your pets. You need to have stuff around you. You need to be able to do certain things, but you don't need to just do anything. Listen, people, again, if they have some time, they're going to be rushing around in order to be filling it as quickly as possible. So yes, there is some stuff in inverted commas to do, but not just any stuff. So we're going to be looking at what's going to be really important during that time where you make maximum benefit from it, which is going to turn your self-isolation or your forced isolation from a burden to really a turning point and even a thriving point in your life. There is also some stuff like really problems that we get into when we start being just with ourselves. We're brooding over events. We are wishing that. We are fearing that. We have all kinds of emotions that are coming, totally are invading us. And the way a lot of people deal with this nowadays is to rush into social media, into telephone calls, into WhatsApp, into whatever it is that they're using for communication. But really, this is not self-isolation best part. If you decide to have social contact, by all means have it, but do be choosy what kind of contacts it is. Don't fall into indolence. Don't, kind of get into the situations where you don't get up in the morning or you don't go to bed at night or you don't take care of yourself. You don't have any routines, etc., etc. So getting into a meaningful routine with being aware of the dangers of what happens when you're on your own is something that you really need to be acquainted with. And it's a little bit kind of learning, a new lifestyle. It's not that difficult, but one needs to go through it. Of course, if you are confined into a specific area, you can't just sit on your bum all day or lay on your bed all day. You have to be moving around. You have to exercise meaningfully. So you're not going to go to the gym and start pumping iron, or you're not going to do cardio with a Samba class. But there is a lot of things that you can do, and maybe things that you can take up or retake or go deeper with, maybe some yoga, maybe some other forms of exercise. In any case, thinking about how you're going to be moving your body is important, because the way you move your body means being clearer and clearer in what happens in your mind. And that is really the purpose of that particular exercise. All in all, you're going to do better than surviving, because surviving is just like going through the day and hoping the next one is going to be okay as well. Well, no, you are actually taking hold and consciously grabbing this opportunity. You now have the time to review your habits, and you can find out what you like about them, what you don't like about them, what are their results, whether you need to change anything, whether you need to reinforce certain habits, create other ones. Really, the matter of surviving is no longer available. It's not applicable. It's really about you deciding what you're going to be doing, taking control again. So here we come into this beyond surviving, into the thriving. Once you've organized all the what I would call the material side of your isolation time, and once again it can be any kind of isolation, then it's time to get meat and potatoes part, or to really the deep part of a self-isolation. We are getting into what I mentioned at the beginning, the happiness parameters. Happiness parameters are the set of parameters that you can move dynamically to make sure that you are always at ease with yourself. So I repeat, it's a set of parameters that you move dynamically, so you are in control, so that you are always at ease with yourself, whatever the situation and whatever life is throwing at you. And that changes the meaning of happiness to the point that instead of being dependent on what happens from the outside, And instead of being stuck with a specific view of life that you may hold at some time, you realize that by tweaking a few things in your own mind, you can look and keep that poise, that ease, that comfort with yourself. And we are going to be, going very deeply into this. I don't know anybody else who is teaching this, but I think, once I started using it to explain this to my clients, they found a lot of usefulness to it, and I hope this is going to be the case with you too. And this brings us to meaningfulness, a word that we have totally forgotten in our daily life. Does it have a meaning? Most of the time, the only meaning is to maybe bring some dollars home. It is usually at the end of the day getting some dollars in some form or other so that you can do something with it. But it is not getting to understanding what it means to be human, what it means to be living within an ecosystem, because we don't live in isolation just as much as we, sometimes think we do. We are on a planet which has limited resources, and we use them as if there was no tomorrow. Well, the way we're going about it, there ain't going to be any tomorrow. But meaning in our life, what is it? I mean, what's really life? What's the purpose of it? What are we doing with it? You blink twice and you've moved from being born to sitting on your deathbed. What are you going to say to yourself when you're on your deathbed and thinking, oh my God, I wish I had XYZ? Looking at meaningfulness now, what we can, because we either have been given involuntarily or we are taking voluntarily the time to sit down and actually think about it, is probably the greatest gift that you're going to give yourself during that time. Once you get to grips with that idea of meaningfulness for your own life, then you can start looking at what's holding you back from putting it into action. Because there's no point in kind of having these ideas and not knowing why you didn't do it up till now. Finding out what is holding you back is already, kind of taking the sting out of it and enabling you to find solutions for it. If you had to do it all over again, how would you be setting things up? How would you be organizing yourself? And this will be going into the example part of your life. Where did you take turns involuntarily or voluntarily, which took you away from yourself? And that you can be passing on to the next generation, as well as making sure you aren't going to be doing it yourself as you progress through life. And then you're going to be coming really to this turning point where suddenly, because the rush, because all of the things which are buzzing down your ears, all this advice you're getting from so-called experts who are probably as expert as you are, with all kind of differing opinions and so on, have only got one result. And that result is that you are totally confused. You're turning from one thing to the other. And you are not taking time for yourself. So now you understand this. Not only don't you understand it intellectually, but because you've given yourself the space to experience it, you are able to effect your own turning point. In creating this own turning point, then you use meditation and visualization, and we'll go into some basics or a little bit more advanced for those of you who are already practicing some kind of meditation and visualization. What is it exactly? What is it for? How can you use it? It's not something that just yogis in the 15th century were doing in the high plateau of Tibet, but it's something that you can do because it's universal, because it brings that kind of focus, that kind of calm, that kind of serenity, that kind of depth to whatever it is that you're looking, and prevents you from getting back into the rush. Of course, there is, like everything else, you absorb from your environment. So if you're watching Netflix, you are not necessarily going to become extremely calm, collected, and thoughtful. But there are some reading and some thinking that goes along with the reading. Top CEOs nowadays are still attached to Marcus Aurelius' meditations based on Seneca. There are loads of different aspects which, once you've decided where you want it to be, how you want it to go about things, it's much easier to look for meaningful reading and not just glossing over it. It's not like, oh, I've read this book and then I'm going on to the next one because I need to read as much as possible. No. It's you take a book, you take a page, you take a paragraph, you absorb it, you think about it, what does it mean? And then that is actually exercising your intellectual capacity, which have been incapacitated by our modern way of life, where our attention span is lower than that of a goldfish, apparently. And I can believe that because, we jump like a flea from here to there. It's learning how to read again and what to do with the reading. I mean, it's just not, as I said, not just about reading, but helping you to absorb it and to make it part of your vision and make it part of the life that you're creating. Then you can, kind of really, once you start feeling better in yourself, then it's much easier to start thinking, well, what's my relationship with the planet, of course, and what's my relationship with the universe? What am I in the universe? So it's not something that I'm going to bring you answers to because I don't have any. I mean, I have some thoughts, but they're definitely not answers that everybody needs to agree to. But what I can bring you is this idea about thinking about the bigger parts of things. If you imagine yourself above the earth, like the astronauts when they first started to take off from the cow's earth, and they were getting into orbit and they suddenly realized what the earth actually looked like. And we got the first pictures back, and I can remember being a kid and looking at this, and thinking, how beautiful is it? And then nowadays we don't realize it when we're sitting in an office, in between four walls or in a bed sit or something. We just kind of forget our relationship to this enormous, infinite universe. So it's kind of putting things back into perspective, because when we're starting to feel depressed or we're starting to feel angry or bickering or whatever, and then we just kind of have this ability to replace ourselves into the right frame of mind, then that's also part of how to reset your happiness parameters and keep your ease and your poise in every circumstances. Then I'll get you to write a letter to yourself. This letter you will read in 10 years' time. It's going to be you today writing to yourself in 10 years' time from now. And you'll see it's a really, really very deeply involved setting, because you will be able to really get to grips with your space as a human being in different steps in your life. And anyways, I'm just not going to say too much about it, but you're going to love it. All this brings us to the point that there is nothing fixed. I mean, the only constant that we can find anywhere in the universe, anything that we know of, is change. We build things as if they were never going to change. Look at this incredible story of the virus. Within a few days, a few weeks, everything that people had been building for years, decades, and so on and so forth, and they were planning for the future and da-da-da, and then suddenly everything falls down because nothing is working anymore. It couldn't be happening at a more sudden and strange scale as what it is currently. So I don't know when you're going to be listening to this. It may be history by that time, or it might still be kind of valid. But think about the fact that nothing ever stays the same. And this is why happiness can never be the same. This is why it needs parameters, that is to say, things that are going to be evolving with circumstances, because the circumstances are never going to be the same. So what does impermanence mean for our search for the meaning of our life? What does it mean for our search for what we're going to be, how we're going to effect this turning point, how we're going to control all these emotions, how we're going to control the way we go about things as we go along, and actually better than control, I think it's going along with. which is the most correct way of talking about it. When we realize all this, then people say that's real or that's not real. Well, certainly when you've gone through an experience like suddenly the whole planet comes to a halt and everything which had been planned is just disappearing in a couple of days or weeks, then there is a funny state of reality. I mean, is reality just as solid as we had taken it for granted? Or do we suddenly discover that there are different states of reality? Do we suddenly discover that there are different appreciation? Maybe this reality is just kind of moving along with our own consciousness, our own awareness, our own ability to fathom out what's going on. So that's why I called it the funny state of reality. And we're going to be throwing a little bit of quantum physics in it just to put a spanner in the works. I mean, I'm not a great scientist, but I've been interested in things for quite some time. So we're going to talk about a few really interesting things there. So all of these brings you to what I would call reassessing. We will have learned how to live differently from what we are now. We will have learned how to be prepared calmly without, going over the top or forgetting things. We're going to be in the state where we learn to give ourselves time and space. I mean, time and space is the same thing. If you give yourself space, you give yourself time. We're going to be reassessing what it is that we were believing in, what it is that we were accepting blindly, what were causing us uncomfortable situations and experiences, how we will have learned to recognize it, and what we've decided to do about it. Obviously, the next step is planning for after. So what happens when you get out of that situation of self-isolation, whether it was, once again, forced or you decided that you wanted to take a break and a step back? What is it that how are you going to organize yourself? It's important to think about it so that it's a little bit like when you take a child for the first few walks outside, they have learned to put one foot in front of the other, but they certainly haven't learned how to walk. And you are going to be in the same situation. You're going to know that you can move, but you are not steady on your feet. So a little bit of planning will help you not go awry. You're going to be planning for the future, but the great difference is that you're not going to be forever between the past and the future. You will have learned how to live in the now. You will have learned how to be present. You will have learned how to be totally occupying that particular second that is happening just now. And that will make a world of difference. I mean, a universe of difference. And that is only words that you hear, and you may have heard from other people before. But when you start actually having had these moments of experiences where you can know the difference between being in the past or in the future, but not being in the present, and then suddenly you're forced to be in the present. You're forced to be with yourself. You're forced to just be. And you know that feeling, then it is something that nobody can take away from you. And you will always be able to get back, check yourself back and say, hey, whoa, I'm not there. Let's get back here now. Self-isolation is a wonderful way to get this. So there are some little things which are happening at the same time, and we're helping to make it happen a little faster. So first of all, there is physical detox. So we're going to be talking about food. We're going to be talking about what we need. We're going to be talking about how our body works. We're going to be talking about all the stuff that we have ingested. We are going to be talking about all these society, civilization, illnesses, and how actually, I nearly said easily you can get rid of them. But yes, it is. Actually, it's just a matter of understanding how you are being clogged up and learning what to do to declog. So these are extremely important, down-to-earth points that you will become acquainted with, and then you can carry on learning about it, if you're interested later on. And then, of course, there is a mental detox, because you are no longer into that vicious circle dragging you in all directions. And you will learn when you get interferences, and your mind is much more alert, because your body is more alert as well. well. And you are going to be able to see when something is starting to clog you up, something is starting to poison you. This is part of the mental detox and all the points that help you to recognize how to get rid of things, how to let go of things, and also how not to get reclogged thereafter. And the third thing that I have including is relationship detox. Because once again, when we rush towards the other, whether it's a significant other or whether it's others with an S, it happens rather than it is planned. What is important in relationships? What is important? What makes the beauty? What makes the depth? What makes the experiencing in a relationship? Let's understand what's been happening for you up till there. Make sure that relationships that you enter into in the future are going to be ones which are going to be mutually beneficial to all of you. Really, you will have gained your independence. You're safe, sound, and it's like a little bit like the new you. Actually, it's still you, but it's probably, like a real you, which is emerging. You are ready to go out because suddenly people are letting you out, or because you've decided it's the end of your retreat or your self-isolation. But whilst you are going out, you are not going to disperse. You're not going to go anywhere else. You are going to stay within yourself. This is a feeling where you are literally independent without fear like you had from the beginning, all these fears that we talked about at the beginning of the program. You're safe, you're safe, you are sound because you are in good health mentally and physically. You are capable of taking the reins of your life again. That will be the end of this particular program that I'm very much looking forward to doing with you. If that really rings a bell for you, and perhaps today is an interesting time to enter this, then I would suggest that you go to wherever it is on that page to book for that program. One thing that I haven't said is how long this lasts. Well, I develop the units, I develop the modules, and basically it's up to you to take them at the speed at which you feel comfortable. Some people love to rush through things. Yeah, well, that's one of the problems. And some people like to take their time, but there are certain modules that you are going to want to stay with for a little bit longer because they make sense to you, or they cause you a problem, or they are really kind of tickling your curiosity, or you're going to feel attracted to them. And on the other hand, there are other things that you will say, well, okay, I've got that, and you may not want to spend so much time on it. But what I'm also doing is that I'm creating a space where we can meet and where you can ask me questions, probably get in touch with other participants. It's a little bit of how long is a piece of string. I think you should really kind of think in terms of at least a month to go through this, because it's actually, kind of a review of your whole life. But you could take much longer for it, and it doesn't matter, because once you access it in your dashboard, you have a space which is dedicated just to you. There are ideas for exercises, for things, for their videos, there are podcast, and I will keep on moving and adding materials and updating materials as time goes on, because it's a program that I'm deeply interested in and I want to share with you. Then I think you may want to revisit it as you go along, and that's perfectly okay, because as long as we've got internet and I'm around, then there's no reason why you wouldn't have access to it. So, having said that, please now go to the page that invites you to connect and book for this program. I think go quickly, because we are all being forced at this moment in time to take some time under a bubble. So let's make the best of it. And I'm looking forward to meeting you and talking with you and helping you to make a really, really wonderful time out of what could be, for many, a really unpleasant time. But this is not going to happen for you. And I'm looking forward to speaking with you soon. All right, take care.